Hydration's like most important part of adulthood, I've decided.
Look, I've learned too. I've learned too in a short period of time.
Okay, it appears we're live, but Bruce, you disappeared. You were there, now you're gone. And I'm pretty sure Phoenix.
All right, we good. We on. What's going on, brother?
Thanks for having me, man. It's like I was just saying before we started. It's good to get to actually see you. This is as much. This is as close as we get in 2020 to seeing each other. But it's funny how this has become. Like I'm kind of used to it. I'm like, oh, I'm hanging out with Bruce tonight, like as if we're in the same place. So,
Right, right.
but I'll take it.
Man,
I'll take it.
so of course I appreciate you. When we do our community conversations, this is how we started off. I always started off with, as we know how 2020 has been. It's been I mean, it's been horrific in so many different ways. But these type of interactions and these genuine friendships that I've been able to actually talk. It's not like I'm just interviewing and talking to, former elected officials or people doing the work. Like these are genuinely my friends,
Yeah.
And so we have this segment where we say, give them their flowers. And for your flowers, I just want you to know how much I've always appreciated you
Right.
from the support while I was in office, but more so from the behind the scenes, right? As we talk about all the things of being elected officials and going through the things that we go through, even as just human beings. And you've always been that, and a lot of people don't know, but I guess the world knows now. So you were one of the first people that I tapped into when, I was just, I was struggling, and
Hmm.
I appreciate you. Appreciate Stephen so much. And I can admit now that LeBron is the greatest.
Well, this is so worth it now. Well, look, man, I appreciate you a lot too. You know that, and yes, I mean you and Stephen and I have had a text chain argument. It's actually been on multiple platforms. We've had this over text. I believe we may have had it over email. We've had it definitely over Twitter DM.
Twitter, yeah.
And it's been me and Steven trying to convince you that LJ is the GOAT, not MJ. MJ obviously a very close number two, like right there in the rear view. But well, I'm curious, what puts you over the edge? Is it this championship at 34 with, a whole different cast, or is it? Tell me what it is.
It has nothing to do with basketball.
Okay, that's a good answer. I
Every
get it.
Yeah, everybody who I'm a extreme fan of, I'm a fan of in real life, right?
Yeah.
Who they are personally, and he's just been an amazing guy from day one. I mean, of course he was talented. Nobody
Yeah.
can take that away from him. I just was like, oh,
Right.
this dude is super big. He's fast,
Hmm.
But his fight in social justice and his willingness to even speak up and speak out, like so many others, and a lot of folks that wouldn't in his position have
Hmm.
we've seen over time. So yeah, that was like that was it for me. I'm like,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah. When he started fighting against voter suppression, I mean, that was next level. Like it's not just like, hey, I'm going to use my platform. It's I'm going to use my platform, and I'm going to be as knowledgeable as anybody else on these issues. Never mind the fact that, my body is my full time job. And he's like one of the most famous people in the world, which is by itself a full. He's like, no, I'm going to make the time, and
right,
I've worked a little now with the guy who runs his, voting rights organization. Like he's
Mhm.
very serious about it. But all that said, I will make a basketball argument to you, and we'll move on to other important things. Let me make two basketball arguments as to why he's the greatest of all time. One, I've stolen from Steven, which is that scene in The Last Dance where they're like the Bulls are like, well, then we found the weight room and we decided, and it's like, dude, they were playing two different kinds of basketball, right?
Right.
But the other thing is, and this is my argument forever, is like, you got to look back to when LeBron James is 18 years old and he's coming out of high school. And all through high school, he's done what every other great player has done in that era, and that's wear number 23. And he's coming straight into the NBA, and everybody's like, is this the next Jordan? And everybody's like, well, surely he's not going to come into the NBA and wear number 23. And LeBron James at 18 years old is like, no, yeah, I'll be wearing number 23. And like anybody who's at 18 years old and is like, and not like, no, I'm not trying to be Jordan, who's just like, bring the pressure. I will meet all of it. That's a remarkable human being. Now, with that, that's probably not why you called this meeting,
but what I will say, a close second to that is Michael Jordan coming back from retirement and wearing 23, like, and like, yeah, y'all could just keep finding me. I'm gonna wear it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, well, you also can make the argument, if you're going to make the argument on the Jordan side, it's got to be, if you ever watched the 30 for 30 about his time at the Birmingham Barons, it's incredible. I love where they're like, look, if he had another few months, like he makes it to the majors, which is pretty amazing considering he had to completely change his body. And anyway, all right, we should probably talk about other things. I'm not trying to take anything away from Jordan. You know, I grew up in Kansas City, you know, just like you grew up in St. Louis. We didn't have NBA teams. The Bulls were my team growing up, like everybody, and I had the Jordan jersey and all that. Anyway,
yeah.
So
I was a Bad Boys Pistons fan.
Okay, well.
But what I will say is, for those who don't know, Jason, you were the Secretary of State in Missouri.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And one thing I know I'll never forget, when I came in as a freshman, was your farewell speech.
Mm-hmm.
That was my favorite battle rap moment. That wasn't a battle rap. But
you honored me greatly by calling that a battle rap. I remember. I'll never forget that.
Absolutely. Because I remember how passionate you were, right? Because it wasn't just, oh, this is what's happening. Like, no, you're really affecting lives when you move towards things like voter ID, which was like the biggest thing, you know, when I was coming in, and, you know, they even used my particular case, which had nothing to do with it. But as we see right now, we look around the country, these different forms of voter suppression in the spaces, and most of it comes from communities of color, right? They're shutting down polling places. They're taking people off the voter rolls. We see all of these different issues. Can you speak to voter suppression in 2020? You know, what does it look like? You know, how do we push past it? How do we stay empower each other as we see these things? Because it's so easy to get down about it and feel defeated, you know?
Yeah. So on voter suppression, let me walk through a couple of things. One, it's really important for anybody watching this to understand that voter suppression is just any attempt to make it harder to vote. And there are classic cases. You know, when I started Let America Vote a few years ago, I was just trying to get the world to know that voter suppression existed.
Right.
And now, and I'm not taking, I mean, like, obviously we played a role in this, but really, you know, events also took place that now people are extremely aware of it, and they know that it's things like photo ID. It is anything where the playbook says you create a barrier to voting, and then you create a barrier to the barrier. So like some of the classic examples are like Alabama, for instance. A few years ago, Alabama, basically as soon as the law changed and the Voting Rights Act was basically gone, and there were less federal rules about what a state could do, Alabama said, okay, we are going to require that in order to vote, you have to get an ID at a driver's license bureau, like at a DMV. And then, so that's your barrier, right?
Right.
And then on top of that, they said, oh, by the way, we're going to close down all of the DMVs in the black parts of Alabama, right? Like barrier to the barrier. And the whole idea behind it is when your ideas are such that, as people, you know, this new generation, like let's be honest, Republicans are like, hey, young voters are less likely to support us. Voters that are not white are less likely to support us. And what are two demographics that are getting bigger and bigger? Well, the millennial generation is the largest generation numerically in the electorate right now. And on top of that, the country is getting more diverse. So they're like, rather than say, well, maybe we should change some of our ideas so that some of these groups will come our way. They're like, let's win by subtraction. Let's make it harder for those groups to vote, and then we'll win. And so that's what they do with photo ID. It's what the president tried to do with the post office in this election in a pandemic. But the thing is I don't want to talk too much about the mechanics of voter suppression right now, because we're 12 days from an election.
Facts.
And I don't want to play into their hands and make anybody watching this feel like, oh gosh, they have made it really hard to vote. Because the truth is, they haven't been successful in a lot of these cases. So what I like to focus on is that if you want to vote, you can vote in this election. And then what we can do is if we can gain power, which I think we're on the precipice of possibly doing, we can roll back all this stuff so that we don't have to look historically at the 2020 election as just, when voter suppression, came after us, or the Trump election. We could 10 years from now look back and be like, oh, that's when we started completely rebooting our democracy and making it accessible for everybody. And we can get into that, but there's so many good things that can happen.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad you spoke to that. I think so going in, like making this transition, right? Like we talked about voter suppression, and that's just one thing. That's just one thing that when you think about administration, because what we see is the same thing, and we're gonna keep it real, like it's the same thing in 2016. You have folks who are excited and you have folks who aren't excited, right? So barring any candidate, what's the importance of looking at an entire administration and that's how I've been kind of promoting and saying, hey, this is the importance of it, right? We might not like candidate A, B, C, D, E, or F, right? But as a whole, right, we have to look at these administrations, like what powers lie in that. Like how important is that to have that view when we do have folks on the fence, and how we communicate that to them?
Well, I got a friend of mine who talks about it this way, and I think it's really good. He talks about it like transportation, right? Like, hey, you got to get to your doctor's appointment, and you don't have a car. You'd rather have a car. Well, you got a choice. You can take an Uber, kind of expensive, not your ideal. You could take the bus, not your favorite, and the bus doesn't go all the way there, but it's the most affordable, probably the best option for you. Yeah, you're going to take the bus, and then you're going to walk for a half a mile. And it's not your favorite thing, but it beats the hell out of never getting to go to the doctor, right? And so his point is sort of like, hey, we don't refuse to go places when we don't have the perfect, mode of transportation to get there, right? We still go to our appointments. We still do the things we have to do in our lives. And that's how elections work is, if a candidate agreed with you on absolutely everything, wait, then wow, you should win some sort of prize, because I've never had that happen ever. I mean, like that would make a marriage boring, let alone a country. And so, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But on top of that, it's also, movements are not about people, right? I mean, I got a buddy who says that he hates that he knows about so many of the characters of this administration. Like he feels like he knows the cast of characters in the Trump administration almost as well as he knew the cast of characters on the administration in the second season of The West Wing. He's like, and that's wrong. I don't want to know it that well, right? I don't want to know who the postmaster general is, because I got to worry about them messing with the mail. And that's right, and it is super frustrating. But it's an executive administration, but it's also like these decisions that are made at the local level have huge effects on our lives. And I always tell people, if you are frustrated with a candidate at a high level, then personally get to know. I mean, as you know, Bruce, like personally get to know somebody running for the state legislature, running for the city council, because that person, you may not agree with them on everything, but if you are like a super volunteer on that campaign, then you got their cell number. And if you disagree with them on something they're doing once they're in office, like you call, they're going to pick up. I've been in politics now for for 12 years. And I'm somebody who, 2 years ago, I was getting ready to run for president. But if there's a guy named Joe Stokely knocked on like so many doors for me when I ran for the state legislature in 2008. If Joe Stokely called me right now, I would stop this live and I would talk to Joe Stokely. Right. Like, I mean, we, as a candidate, you become very, very close to the people who help you in those local races, and that means that if you're one of those people who gets really involved, you can have a big role in helping to govern.
Absolutely, and it's wild that you brought that up because former secretary, still my secretary, I don't care what nobody say, Julian Castro said the same exact thing when we talked. As we
Yeah.
talked about local elections, all of us, coming from local elections, and even going as far as to let the world know that when I moved into my office, I had Jason Kander's desk, and so there was a
Mm-hmm.
thing that was started where we signed it in permanent marker. So I
Mm-hmm.
made sure I put my, I
Yeah,
made
I
sure I
remember.
put my name down. I definitely put Oops on there, put my rap name on there too. They got to know that. But I think that's important as we talk about this election, because a lot of folks concentrate so heavily when we have our presidential primaries, our presidential generals. And when you talk about these city council races, when you talk about these state legislatures and school boards, like all these races who people see as small but are really huge, right? Our kids go to
Mm-hmm.
school all
Right.
day, all
Yeah.
day, most of the year. And so why not? How important is it to vote those folks in who will be making those necessary decisions as we move into this election, and we days away, like you said. um the importance of these swing states and what real chances you're seeing
Mm-hmm.
out there as far as the opportunity to change. And I will highlight that folks in Texas are doing amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Those young people, shouts out to Move, shouts out to everybody doing the work in Texas. Definitely wanted to shout them out. But yeah, what are you seeing as far as the swing states and where we, where we necessarily win, or could?
So I'm feeling really good about it. I mean, you're in Arizona right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a couple of virtual events for Arizona, and I think the momentum is really good. Uh, I've got some very good friends in Arizona politics. The county recorder there, Adrian Fontes, the congressman Ruben Gallego are really close buddies of mine, and they're all feeling pretty confident.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important. And I mean, the fact that Texas is in play is amazing. But what I think we have to keep in mind is like, look, I'm feeling pretty good about the presidential, but there's so much more on the line than that, because going
Absolutely.
back to what we were talking about a minute ago, like this is an opportunity for a reset. And that means that, look, if all the stuff that has been sort of like academic over the last few years, right? Like we went through a whole primary where we argued about, which healthcare plan are we going to do, or we
Right.
argued about which immigration plan. And what was sometimes frustrating about that, those were worthy arguments. I'm glad we had them. But what was sometimes like unfulfilling about them was that it almost sometimes felt like anybody out there who's watching who did like student Congress, because it was like we were completely out of power. Like we were having these arguments, and I was on the DNC platform committee, and so we had some of these arguments in that committee, and I remember thinking like, but we're out of power. Like it's not like we can make these decisions and then they happen. But now, if we take the House, if we expand our majority in the House, if we take the Senate, and we have the White House, like that ain't student Congress, that ain't academic. Like you name it, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act,
Mm-hmm.
100% we're doing that. HR1, to completely do democracy reform on everything from public financing to voter suppression to redistricting to the whole deal. But you can go farther than that, like stuff we've talked about for years. It's been academic, like making election day a holiday. But all that stuff. Look, the fact that DC in is not a state is, people don't even think about this. That's a gerrymander of the United States Senate. I mean, that's a huge racial gerrymander. That is a huge group of people uh, who are mostly African American, who don't have representation in the United States Senate because the Republicans don't like how that would affect the voting outcomes. That's a racial gerrymander, just not of the House. We can undo a lot of that really bad stuff and do a lot of really good things.
Right.
So the swing states are really important, and I think we're doing well in them. But it doesn't matter where you live. If you live in a state that's definitely going to go Republican or definitely going to go Democratic in the presidential, there's two reasons why you should still vote your ass off in those. And the first is there's a bunch of races on your ballot that we have an opportunity to win now and do good things now. And the second actually has to do with the presidential, which is we have a standing in the world that's really suffered. And the larger the margin in the popular vote, knock on wood, assuming we win, the greater of an ability that Joe and Kamala are going to have to say to other leaders around the world, hey, look, that was an anomaly. You can trust us. Look at the margin. And we should all try to be a part of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So young people, right? I tell people all the time, Jason, that I don't care what nobody say. These young people are amazing.
Right?
Yeah. Like, I'm 36, right? So I'm not, I'm not considered.
You and I are no longer in the people. We still make like the under 40 lists, but like I say things now like, man, it's so energizing to be around these kids,
For real. For real. And it's like I look at them, and even when I look at those who are 10 years younger, right? 10 years, 12 years younger, and the work that they're putting in. Shouts out to my little brother, Rasheen Aldrich, who took my spot, who's amazing, and all the other young elected officials. But when you talk about these young folks, how important?
Yep, you froze, but I'm gonna guess.
Mobilizing.
You froze for a second. Can you go back like 10 seconds? Because you froze on my screen.
We good? Can you?
Yeah, I hear you now, but you got to go back like 10 seconds.
Okay, bet. I was just saying, when it comes to the young people, right? That young mobilizing, the young vote, the young folks who are in the street, like, can you speak to the importance of that and the impact of it?
Yeah, look, at the beginning, we all sort of went into a doldrums with COVID, but at the beginning of the year, even before that, like say around January, I got to be kind of down for a minute about the state of politics in America and about the direction of the country. And I know like maybe that doesn't sound that remarkable. A lot of us have felt that way, but one thing that I have always found a way to be, even when I was going through my own personal stuff, to be pretty optimistic about was, the direction of the country. But I went through a period, a couple months where I was just not feeling it. And then the millennial generation and Generation Z just kind of got the torch and decided to run with it. And we had that 2 months where people just took to the streets, and when things happen, like when Black Lives Matter became twice as popular as the president, when one of the things about America that amazes me so much is the way the youngest generation of adults every couple of decades can just completely change everything we thought we knew about public opinion on a variety of things. We saw it happen on same-sex marriage about a decade ago. We're finally, I hope, starting to see it on things like white privilege and social justice and race in this country. And it's not permanent, and it's not, and it's perishable. But it is, if you think about it, is always the youngest generation that does that. And I can remember a couple of years ago being at a conference of like high school kids and speaking, and then spend a lot of time with them, and then getting on the plane to go home. And I got a lot of flack for this at the time, because at the time, like, people really cared about my opinion because I was going to run. And so they, examined it very closely. And I was just so moved that I tweeted out the voting age should be 16. And I still believe that. I mean, not only is this youngest generation so passionate and so ready to be called to service, but they also have more information at their fingertips than any Americans ever. Like, they have more information than all other Americans right now, right? I mean, because they're like more tech savvy than everybody. So it really is this rising generation that makes me optimistic. I mean, we just had a baby girl, our second child. She's a month old tomorrow. Yeah, thank you. And she's a month old tomorrow. And I know a lot of people who are like, I don't want to have kids right now because, like, I don't want to bring them into this world. And like, it's this youngest generation that makes me feel like, no, I'm good bringing another kid into this world. I think these other kids are going to make it okay for her.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
What about you? I mean, how are your kids, by the way? Like,
man, my kids are amazing. And for those that know, like, my kids are there's even King. King's my youngest. He's 7, and they're so socially aware. They
Yeah.
get. And I remember when the protest started out here, and I actually had all my kids here in Arizona. It was great. The
Hmm.
whole Brady Bunch.
Let's
You
go.
guys can have as many kids as you want. I'm done. So tell them Uncle Bruce will be over there to
Yeah,
visit. I'll
yeah,
give you a couple of mine. But
yeah.
it's I remember, we hit the streets and they were so excited but determined to get out
That's
there and
cool.
protest and march. And so my kids are doing great, and I feel the same way you feel. These, I look at the young people, and I'm like, yeah, we're gonna be all right. We're gonna be. I
Hmm.
trust them. I trust them. Like, and
Yeah.
it's for us to pass that torch while it's still lit. Rather than waiting
Hmm.
for it to die out. I remember, if people want to know why, people always say, "Oh, you got a check mark. You got a check mark," and I
and
had a
and
check.
and Bruce, I apologize. I just
No,
remembered
go ahead.
I've got to go in like 1 minute.
Okay.
Because I promise I have another Zoom date because these things happen. So we got to
All
wrap. But
All good. We'll wrap it up, and I'll wrap it up here. I remember your first podcast, and I remember doing the podcast, and it was
that was
probably the
still my
most
favorite episode, man.
yeah, it's the most amazing interview I did, and we talked about social injustices, and we talked
Hmm.
about that link between politics and activism, and all of those different things. As we leave, as we check out, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you already know. As we
Same.
as we leave, right, and we're dealing with 2020. We're going into this election. We see what's happening in the world as a whole. I just want you to speak to that, a couple words of empowerment,
Sure.
a couple words of just to uplift, because it's easy for us to get down about what's going on.
Yeah, I guess I would just tell people that there's only 12 more days before this election, but really the election's already happening. So everybody don't assume that they're voting. Don't assume that they don't need to be asked. And on top of that, I would say uh, we all get to take a little break for a few days, but then what we should have learned, I think, from 2008 and 2012 is we have to keep this same level of determination and activism and motivation and energy going because we're going to have a lot of really important stuff to pass, and the people in power on our side are going to need that support, and that's how we get that stuff done. So everything we've learned over the last several months or years, now we got to put it to use. Progress doesn't have a finish line. This is a relay race, and we just got to keep going. So
No, absolutely. So
I
I think,
appreciate you, man. Great to
well,
see you.
absolutely, man. Good to see you, and we'll definitely be catching up. We appreciate all the work you're doing.
All right, talk to you later.
All right, Jay.
See ya.
So as we wrap up, appreciate y'all for tuning in. We just wrapped up with Jason Kander, doing amazing work. Does a lot of amazing work around voter education, voter rights, as well as with our veterans. So big salute to Jason. And yeah, y'all, we back at it tomorrow. We're back at it tomorrow. Yes, we have back to back to back to back. So tomorrow we will have one of my battle rap brothers, DNA, who is a household name, who's amazing talent, and who's been using his voice to speak up and speak out, especially as of late. And we'll talk about an ad that he did for the presidential election. We'll talk about views on using a platform at like Battle Rap to speak up and speak out about what's going on and to educate and empower our folks and our community. So we appreciate y'all. Y'all know it's been Community Conversations powered by Generation Progress Action. You want to check us out, go to www.gpaction.org. Thank you so much.